welcome, Annika. And I'm just going to hand over to you and let you get started with what you know about resilient teenagers.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be giving this talk. I've been learning and teaching the principles for 25 years. And like all of us who teach the principles, any opportunity that we have to speak about them and share them is just a joy. I was a psychotherapist before I learned about the principles, and I was leaving the field of psychotherapy when I got introduced to this 25 years ago in 1993. And I realized I really needed help with my own anxiety and stress. I was a big time meditator, and I was always meditating to calm myself down and then working myself up. But it looked like life was coming at me like a rushing train. And then I'd have to calm myself down with meditation or walks in nature. And after I learned the principles, I woke up to my thinking creating my experience, and my mind began to get much quieter. And I started off working with adults. Before the principles, I specialized in women survivors of trauma. So I continued to work with trauma survivors, adults of all kind, and couples. But I have a daughter, and so let's see, I'd been into the principles for 5 or 6 years when I had my daughter. I had her later in life. So she's one of the fortunate ones that was raised in the culture of the principles, and I have plenty of stories about that. But you know, because of her and because of my adult clients who at some point, after getting a lot of help from the principles, if they have a teenager, they will say to me, you know, please take my teenager. My teenager needs to do an intensive. They're really struggling. And so those are some of the stories that I want to share. But when I was thinking about where I wanted to start today, what really occurred to me in reflecting back over the years and my experience with teenagers is how much I love working with teenagers, because it is such an experience of profound love. Because you see someone that young and you know that they're at this trajectory, and that if they could learn something valuable, simple, and profound, that will ground them in their mental health and well-being, they will have a completely different life. And so every time a teenager comes to me, in the beginning, I was a little bit like, well, you know, I don't really work with teens. Now I feel like it's such a privilege. And one of the stories that came to mind as I was reflecting on my presentation today is this. My daughter just graduated from a Waldorf high school here in Southern New Hampshire. People who know me know I've moved around a lot, and a lot of it has been for my daughter's schools. It's either been that or the principals. And so she just graduated. But a couple of years ago, a lot of the girls in the dorm were struggling. And I would hear about this from my daughter, even though she was living with me. Some of them were cutting and having eating disorders, a lot of anxiety. So I called the dean, who knew nothing about the principles. And I said, look, I know what's going on and I can help. And he was intrigued. And I said, you know, I'll volunteer my services. Why don't you, if you want, I'll give a weekly talk in the girls' dorm. So he agreed. And, you know, when you do something like this, it's always a bit dicey because you don't know who's going to show up. You don't know what's going to happen. What happened was I offered this class for 5 weeks. Some of the girls came and went, but for the most part, this core group formed that came every week. And the dorm parents came every week. They were completely just enthralled by this. But the girl that stands out in my mind is a day student who got referred to my class because she was struggling so much with anxiety. I mentioned her to my daughter, and my daughter said, oh yeah, Mom, you know, I don't think she's going to make it here at the school. She would be so anxious that someday she couldn't get out of the car. Her mother would try to drop her at school. She was just shaking with anxiety. She was, you know, a bit awkward, and had no social skills. And she, so she came to my first class and just sat in the corner and didn't say anything. I really didn't think she would come back. She came back the second week and she looked a little bit more relaxed. And in the third week, she started to ask me about this diagram, which I don't know if you've had single paradigm 3P teachers, but that's how I teach the principles.
No, we haven't had anyone on talking about it at the moment.
Oh, really? So about 10 years ago, I learned about this from my friends, colleagues, and mentors, Keith Blevins and Valda Monroe. Keith was given a manuscript by Sydney Banks when Sid was on his deathbed to finish. And in the process of Keith and Valda, his wife, working on the manuscript, they had a profound realization about how the principles reveal a new paradigm in our fundamental perception of reality. And I have found that the impact of understanding the principles as a paradigm has been greater for me, and I get more traction with my clients. They're able to have a more of a logical understanding behind this deeply spiritual revelation of these principles that allows them to sustain it more. That's been my experience. So I was teaching this, and this young woman, by the third class, she asked me about the diagram, and she said, so this is when it looks to me like feelings are coming from something other than thought in the moment. Is that when it looks to me like my anxieties coming from other kids or the teacher? I said, yeah, that's right. And she said, and so you mean if I can realize that they're just my own thoughts, and then she just got really quiet. And I said, yeah, that's right. And she came in on the fourth class. She had a little smile on her face. And by the fifth class and the final class, she was relaxed. And I could tell she had changed. And what happened after that was when I would see her at school, she was walking in with confidence. She had no more trouble attending school. And whenever she would see me, she'd get this big grin on her face. And maybe my favorite moment in all of this was just a week or two ago, watching her process towards the prom, and she had her prom dress on and she had her head held up high. And, these are moments that are so gratifying because I know she's a different kid, and she's going to be able to graduate from this high school, and she's going to be able to go on to college. And when I think of more of the recent stories, I have another story that I really love. Last summer, as there were gatherings before school started, one of the teachers in the K through 8 came up to me. She was so worried about her daughter. And she said, my daughter, I have to talk to you about her. And she's, I guess she had been a freshman the year before. She was going to start as a sophomore this past year. And she said, she's so anxious that she wants to quit school, And she said, I'm very, very worried about her. And word to the wise, one of the things that I always do when somebody brings me their teenager is I ask them to come and learn this too. Because kids are imprinting on the thought patterns of the people around them, usually their parents. A lot of those thought patterns are unconscious. Sometimes they're conscious. But if the whole family learns it, it makes it much more sustainable for the teenager. And plus the parents get the benefit of learning this. So I could tell by how worried the mother was, that worry would have been affecting her daughter. But her daughter came in for a session, and very, very sweet young woman. And really the bulk of it was that she gets anxious about her assignments. And so she puts them off. And then because she puts them off, her anxiety would build. And it would get to the point where she felt like it was unworkable, like she just couldn't take the stress that looked like it was coming from school. So as I worked with her, and again, I was working with the diagram, it looks like your feelings are coming from your assignments. What happens if you realize They're coming from thought in the moment about your assignments. And the key with this is you're looking to have a realization, you know, or an insight. It's not insight in demand. It's the same as with the principle of gravity, which is in place for our physical balance. We lose our physical balance all the time. And because as a child, when you wanted to learn to walk, you were very motivated to walk, you built a lot of awareness of the feeling of losing your balance and the feeling of gaining your balance. And to regain your balance, it's a realization, which is something that is so innate. The capacity for realization is so innate to human beings that it can't be taught, but we can point it out. And that's how I teach this to people. So I help people realize that they have realizations and that it's something that we can find inside ourselves, and that it's from your keen interest in the feeling of being out of alignment with these principles psychologically, all the feelings that are there for you, like insecurity and anxiety and stress, and the feeling of being in alignment, the feelings which could be well-being or calm or inspiration or joy or love. These are all inside out indicators. And so it's a training for people to awaken to when they're getting lost in the illusion that something outside you can put feelings in you, and to learn to get the hang of rebalancing yourself psychologically in the same way that you have gotten the hang of rebalancing yourself physically. So with this lovely young woman, she picked up on it quickly. And I will use these Post-it notes. This is someone I was working with today who was uninspired. And I'll say, you know, uninspired on the right side, uninspired on the left side. What's the impact when it looks like your feelings are coming from something that's not thought? What happens if you can have this realization that you're actually feeling your thoughts? And people will know when they have the realization because their consciousness shifts and there's a settling down inside. And that's a teachable moment where I show my clients how the principles are doing that. They're settling your mind. They're clearing your thinking. And so for most people who get introduced to this, there's a learning curve of moving away from thinking that they're supposed to fix their psychological life, to learning to align with principles and receive the help that they bring. And then once people learn to get inside out, they start to spend more and more time there, more and more time in the present. And they start to experience well-being and mental clarity and confidence. And this is what happened with this young woman. So she saw homework on this side, homework on this side. She began to get inside out. Her procrastination in 3 sessions disappeared, and she has no more anxiety. These are, you know, now this is a young woman who might have dropped out of school, right? 3 sessions. Now, it doesn't always go that way. My very first intensive with a teenager was about 20 years ago. And I had done an intensive with his mom, who suffered from severe anxiety. And she said, I have to work with her son. I can say his name, Mikey, because he's not private about this. Because he was in a profound depression, and they wanted to put him on he was a junior in high school, and they wanted to put him on medication. So at that time, I had never worked. I hadn't done a lot of work with teens. I had done a class with what they used to call juvenile delinquents, kids living in a home who needed some kind of psychology class. And on a grant, I did teach this group of teenagers, which was a story in itself. But Mikey was my next one, and it was very, very challenging because he came and I talked, and this was before I worked with the diagram, and he listened, but he didn't respond. So we went through a whole day, 2 hour to hour and a half sessions. And he said nothing. So I'm reaching for my inspiration and reaching for my inspiration. Day 2 went exactly the same way. So we got to day 3, and as all of us learn as 3 principles teachers, you get better and better at trusting and listening. But this was definitely pushing my trust. But what finally occurred to me, he's a surfer, and it finally occurred to me to say, Mikey, you know how when you surf, do you get like in the zone when you surf? So, now he looked up, he met my eyes, and he shook his head. I said, you know that feeling of just like everything, all's right with the world, and you just feel like you know what to do next? Now I had his attention, his eyes got wide. He went home, he came back for his second session on the 3rd day, and he started to talk. You see, this is the kind of thing that just really gets me. And then on the 4th day, we were able to have a conversation. And then he went back to school, and he had to do a thesis, even though it was his junior year. He had this project, and he did his project on this and, you know, got the award for the best project. And it's now, gosh, 20 years. He's still teaching his friends about this. So another story that I wanted to tell. Yeah, I guess I just want to pause for a moment and say, you know, I'm sure you've heard this from the other teachers, but the longer you teach the principles, the more you love to teach them, you know, the deeper your appreciation, because you're sitting with this gift, you know, these deeply spiritual principles that change people's lives, and you're seeing psychological suffering get reduced, you know, just exponentially, just in huge amounts. And, you know, I didn't set out to be a psychotherapist. I was a writer and a journalist. This just kind of happened to me. And now I think, why would I ever want to do anything else, you know? And I think the other reason that it just grows and evolves is that as a teacher, I'm always learning. I'm always having insights. I'm always learning more. And that's such a gift. Like, what an incredible life. What incredible lives we lead, you know, where doors are always opening. So fast forward 10 years from Mikey, and I was back living on the vineyard. I had a little chapter in between, about 5 years out on Whidbey Island, and worked for Pransky and Associates. And then 2008 happened, and they let everybody go, and I moved back to Martha's Vineyard. And an architect who had done an intensive with me, his son was in trouble. So he sent his son for an intensive, also very challenging, because what I had really learned, one of the ways that I found this single paradigm so user-friendly, was to teach people that your feelings are your GPS system, and they'll show you all the time where you are in thought. So I started to talk to this young man about his feelings, and he had no idea what his feelings were. And I kept, you know, nosing around and trying to draw him out. And finally it hit me, you know, he was severely depressed. And when you're depressed, your feelings are all a muddle. You know, depression is anxiety that's gone on long enough that our psyche collapses under the weight of it, and our feelings are all mushed together. So this guy, I just spontaneously came up with this feeling chart because of this young man, which I will use with people who are depressed. And I find it enormously helpful, because if they can find one feeling, sad, mad, whatever it is, and they'll say, well, I'm, you know, at least half of me is sad. That was the case of this young man. At least A third of me is mad, you know, any other feelings. And I remember when I first went through this with him, there was either nothing positive or there might have been a tiny little sliver. I don't remember. But it gave me a way to take him through the diagram. So where does it look like your anger's coming from? I remember this very sad, mad young man. His mother was an alcoholic, and that was why his father, who sent him to me, had divorced her because her alcoholism had progressed to the point where he found it unworkable. And it had gotten worse since the divorce. And this young man was living with his father, but he was very sad about his mother and angry, you know, that his life had seemed to have turned out the way it had. And so as we began to work with, okay, mad, it looks like it's coming from your mother's, or sad, your mother's alcoholism. And he began to settle down a little bit. And once we settle down, the principles are clearing the thinking that we don't need, so that he can be sad in the moment, but not depressed sad, healing sad, sad washing through him to heal the loss of his family, his intact family and his mother. And so then it was such a joy when he came in the next day, and there was a few more slices, you know, sad and mad got smaller, and there was hope and a little calm. And then we were able to work through some more of the mad or whatever, frustrated, all the other feelings. And really by the third day, he was out of his depression. Usually with teens, they only need 3 of the 4 days of an intensive, and their parents, by the time they bring them, they're like, oh no, they're going to need the whole 4 days. You don't know how messed up they are. And I'll say, okay, but be ready to pick them up after day 3. And they're always done by day 3, because we are these principles, and teenagers are closer to them than adults because they don't have the decades of thought habits in the way. So when you get through to them, they're like, oh, got it, done. which is really very gratifying. You know, the story that I just referenced about my very first job working with teens was that group of offenders, juvenile defenders. Boy, that was hard, because they were mandated groups are always the hardest, but also because different people would come every week and they were bouncing off the walls. But I remember that very first week, you know, I taught the principles. I thought this was a total loss. No one seemed to be listening. I left. I came back the next week. Maybe 2 of the 5 kids, of the same kids came back. And then there were maybe 5 new kids. But you know what happened? I thought I was going to start to teach, and one of the boys said, hey, get a load of this. And then he taught the new kids everything that I had taught him the week before. I was shocked. You know, it had all gone in, and it had affected him. And then as the weeks went on, the groups started to be more consistent and calmer. But the thing that really, really impacted me was seeing how much it impacted him, even when I didn't think he had heard a word. And that's just an indicator of how built into us these principles are, because when people are that young, they hear them and they get it deeply, and they get traction from it very, very quickly. It's very enjoyable to see how they then make use of it in their lives. I'll tell one last story. My daughter, Rihanna Shawn, she's well known in the 3 Principles community. When she was 12, I was invited to the Minnesota 3 Principles Global Community Conference to speak on parenting and families with her and Kara Stanback. Kara kind of lost track of time, and she talked for a long time, maybe 40 minutes. So I talked for 10, and my daughter had 10 at the end. And she talked about how being bullied had, deeply affected her. She was bullied badly for at least a year when she was in 4th grade after we moved back east. And, but then as she started to embrace the principles more consciously, she got over it. And she didn't say much at that conference, but what she said had so much impact on the audience that many people were in tears. And all the questions at the end were for her. And what she said was, I feel sorry for those bullies, because she said, when she looked out the window, she said, you see that tree out there? They can't see that tree because their minds are too caught up in all their negative thinking. And then she was invited to do a plenary at Ticken. She was 13. And then she also speaks, there's a section of her recorded an interview on the iHeart training. And she's on, there's several interviews with her on Rudy Kennard's site, which I'm not sure what it's called anymore. But so a lot of people like to look those up that are interested in hearing from teens. So at this point, I would usually ask for questions.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody has any.
We have the links to Rudy and Rudy and Jules are going to be on Saturday. So,
lovely.
And we have links to their website already.
Oh, good.
Some of their things already on. So, yeah. So I can't see any. If anyone would like to ask questions, you can either type into the chat box or you can raise your hand and you can come on and actually speak if you'd like to. But in the meantime, I was going to ask you. Oh yes, I was going to ask you. So a couple of things. When you do these intensives with young people, what does that involve? That you said 4 days or sometimes 3 to 4 days?
Yeah. So they're usually intensives are 4 days. As I said, I'll usually put the parents on alert that they may finish in 3. Whether you're a teen or an adult, it involves clearing your schedule completely and coming in for 2 sessions a day.
Right.
And the sessions last for as long as people can keep learning. So I create a schedule such that it's tailor-made for whomever comes, so that I give people, I will teach as much as people can learn. There comes a point where people get full in a session. Sometimes that's half an hour in, sometimes it's 2 hours in. Then they go back to their hotel and I give them materials to Sid Banks to read or things to reflect on. And then they come back for their afternoon session. And I've been doing these now for 20 years. And I find that amount of time is extremely effective for people wanting to get on the other side of really troubling habits, whether it's anxiety, depression, phobias, whatever it is. Yeah, so I do a lot of those.
Okay, so Jamie is asking, do you work with the statutory services at all, or are they all private clients that you're working with now?
Mostly private clients. I don't know, is this a British person? I don't think we call it statutory here. But I am not that involved with social services. But, I do get referrals from all over, but I don't, I don't work directly with agencies. In America, that would be a social worker that would do that.
So people would have to pay you privately to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, I know. So sometimes, like last week, an agency called me about a young woman who had been coming to them for remedial employment training, and said she would pay, their agency would pay me for her to see me. So that does happen too. Yeah.
And if there are people who, for example, who are in the UK or who are somewhere where they can't get to you to do sessions, what would you recommend that they look at first? Because I know you have some videos on your website, don't you, for example?
Yes. So I have a 30-minute video on my website, annikahurwitt.com, that explains the single paradigm. And I have a lot of other videos that just talk about the principles. And I also would recommend, well, I like Keith and Valda have an 8-part digital download that you can order through Tversky Institute, which I recommend to my clients. Anything by Sid Banks, and that is sidbanks.com. You can live stream his videos or order his books. The books that I most often recommend are, well, for teenagers, probably Dear Liza, but in general, Second Chance, which was, I believe, his second book, and The Enlightened Gardener are great books to read. And then I work with people all over the world on Zoom, and people even do intensives on Zoom. So there's that. Yeah, I mostly like, again, I find there's an efficiency to the single paradigm. So I recommend you can go to Keith and Valda's website, which is 3principlesparadigm.com, or anything that from Chantal Burns, Sandy Crott, myself, Tanya Kennard, or Cheryl Bond were sort of the main single paradigm teachers. Yeah, so I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll put links to all of those things underneath the video too. So, and Jamie said also, do teenagers actually like content from Sydney Banks?
You know, that's such an interesting question. I would say with teenagers about probably half the time. Now, small children love it. It was very surprising to me when my daughter was 2. I could put him on, I'd put on a DVD, and she would love it. She'd get quiet. And I've heard from other parents that their children will encourage them to watch Sid Banks because it settles them down, and the kids feel the good feeling, you know. With teenagers, you know, to be honest, they usually get better so fast that we never get to the "you should be reading these materials" part. So I can't give a really accurate representation about how teenagers do tend to be very fast moving and all about their social life. So, but I would say younger than teen and older, you're going to find they're going to be a little more drawn to Sid.
Okay, so one more thing from Jamie. He says, yes, he is British and he's a social worker. So are you, I don't know if are you already working with the principles, Jamie, or we don't know how much you know about it, but we'll see.
Yeah, definitely you would be able to, you know, teach the principles as a social worker. And, you know, there are people in England who have brought the principles to trainings for psychotherapists and social workers. I don't know if has that information surfaced at all? Yeah. Yes.
I know Robin Lockhart's been on, and Robin does lots of work with young people already.
Oh, okay.
So.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of resources available. Mm. You've gone. I can't hear you now, Anne.
Sorry, I forgot I switched my microphone
off.
That's
otherwise, all right.
Otherwise, it comes on to me. And
yeah.
I don't think we have any other questions just at the moment. I think that's it for the moment. Oh, wait a minute.
There's four yeah. questions on the chat. Yeah. Loving life.
So, Jamie, I am indeed transitioning out of social work as I can't fight the system from within. I'm also an iHeart facilitator. Oh, okay, great.
Oh, lovely. Yes.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, bless you. You know, I think you're, I don't know how much at the beginning of this journey, but as I said earlier, it's just going to get richer and richer. And if you have any questions for me, anybody, you're welcome. Is that all right if I tell people you're welcome to email me? It's my name, Annika Hurwitt.
We also have all of those links on the website. Yeah. So they all they do is come to your page on the website and click on all the links. It's
okay. So yeah. I'm happy to answer any other questions. You know, if you think of them after this talk. Thank you for that beautiful heart, Jamie. and back at you. Yeah, so I am, I do like to, I'm happy to answer questions that might occur to people afterwards.
And the other thing is that if people just want to post questions underneath the video, they can do that, and I can pass them on to Annika and make sure that she sees them, which I will do, all of those, if they don't want to be fiddling around finding links and so on. So that's
beautiful.
Yeah. Right. So that's lovely. Thanks so much for that, Annika. And it's just a really nice introduction and giving people some idea about what actually is possible with teenagers. And it's just brilliant to hear how quickly you've seen changes. And that's just lovely.
Yeah. And I guess what I would like to say in closing is, you're dropping a seed and you're watering it. And with teenagers, it's going to bloom, for the most part, more quickly than you anticipate. But when there's a lag, keep the faith, because they're just, it's just germinating, and then it's just going to explode in them, and you'll see it over and over again. And what a labor of love. We're teaching the principles to teens, and so important, because they are obviously going to be running our world, and our world needs very resilient people these days. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that was the whole point of doing this whole series of videos, because think of the impact it's going to have on the world as a whole.
Yes.
Which is pretty important just now.
Very important. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a speaker.
And thank you so much for being here, Annika. Thanks so much. And all the links will be below the video. So thank you.
Okay.
And see you later.
All right.
Bye then.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.